Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
Yo and hello everybody, Mike Moynihan here, and welcome to another episode of the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. With me as always, or at least as mostly, Andy Davis. Andy, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Mike. How are you tonight?
Well, I'm good. We're in the middle of, playoff baseball, which is kind of fun to be a part of. The finals will be over tomorrow. We're recording this on a Wednesday, and the NBA finals should be over tomorrow, I would think. You thinking Lakers or Heat?
I think with all the injuries, it's got to be the Lakers, right?
I would think so. But this isn't a basketball podcast, is it?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. We'll do that next week. We'll do a basketball podcast. But today we're going to talk about a really cool topic because it's been kind of the hot topic all across the hobby for months and months and months, really all of 2020 and even late last year. And that's just crazy prices. I mean, haven't you seen just everybody talking about this? That's all people want to talk about.
It's been a subject that has been discussed a lot, yes, in the hobby and all aspects.
Almost ad nauseum, right? And there's no retail and yada yada. I mean, I've even done videos on it. We've all talked about it. But what I want to talk about tonight that I think is an important distinction is it happening everywhere across the card market? Is it really? And we can, again, have a perception of what might be happening, but is there data to back that up? And hopefully I'm going to bring some data tonight to show that, or at least have a discussion about that. I don't want to give away that nobody will listen to the rest of the podcast if I tell them what the conclusion is, right?
Yeah, you can't give a conclusion this early.
Yeah, it'd be too early. And besides, you and I, we're not the only ones that have maybe some thoughts on this subject. So I got us a guest tonight.
Who do you have in mind?
Well, I tried like 10 other guys. And so I was left with one guy that I thought might be able to contribute something meaningful and productive. And it's Joe. So obviously meaningful and productive just left the room. And
I got my money on the Heat.
You're going to lose that money.
It's very subjective.
I bet the house on the Heat.
Do you want to do a podcast, Joe, about vintage baseball cards? Or?
You know what's great about the guitar is you just play I only know how to play 3 chords. It's G, D, and C, and that's all you really need to know. And you can play thousands of songs. It's great.
Thanks.
Yeah, I want to do a podcast.
Okay.
Which song was that?
That was the Heat are gonna win. Let's go Heat! Let's go Heat! Let's go Heat! Sorry.
Thank God there's editing.
You're gonna edit me out?
A true lyric, man.
Maybe that
It would
part.
be weird if you edited me out, because then you'd be talking to nobody.
What? Andy's a nobody?
No, I mean right now it would seem like if you edited me out, it wouldn't make any sense, because you'd be I'm bringing on this guy, and then I don't know. Anyway,
it's probably not going to make any sense anyway. We slide.
Well, Joe, since since I know you're a YouTube guy, you can put the guitar down now. We're going to actually talk serious stuff. Okay.
All right. I'm putting it down until I got asked a question I don't like.
I appreciate your talent, by the way.
Thank you.
Or lack thereof. But, I want everybody to kind of know you, that it is maybe just listening to this on a podcast and don't know who Silver Jackify is. Everybody on YouTube that's watching this will certainly know who you are, but why don't you tell everybody kind of what your background is in making content and collecting and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I been doing YouTube videos for like 6 or 7 years. And I remember when I first started doing videos, I only did it because I was like, there's got to be somebody else on this planet that collects baseball cards besides me. And the cool thing is I did a video and then I got thousands of views of people just having the same interest as I did, which was awesome. And I think people like my channel because they can see that I have a passion for sports cards. And if you guys have seen my channel, I I try to collect a little bit of everything especially when it comes to baseball cards. I mean, lately I've been branching a little bit outside of baseball just to have a little bit of everything. But my focus with my collection is just having the best cards of all time. Everything from the 1888 Goodwin champions, Cap Anson, to the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle, to the 2009 Bowman Chrome Mike Trout. I want to own a piece of history, when it comes to modern to vintage. So I love collecting. And I love sharing it with people. So it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this particular podcast, because you are heavy into vintage. You're heavy into, and I don't want this to sound silly, but you buy really nice stuff, high-end stuff. When you buy a card, it's a big boy card. And you also do modern. So you're as ingrained as a person that I know that kind of is in both worlds. Whereas most collectors are either modern, they might dabble in vintage, or you're vintage that predominantly, and you might dabble in modern. But I think you're a great example of somebody who is in touch with all of it. And so here you are as a subject matter expert on that. Do you think you can live up to the challenge?
No, I don't think I could live up to the challenge, but I will try. But yeah, I say this on my channel all the time that I try to do, in order to justify, spending big money on cards. I try to look at, as a collector, but also as somebody that, and I don't know if I'll ever sell my cards, but I like to know that if I do decide to sell it, or if I want to pass it down to my kids or my grandkids, that they'll have a really nice collection, And so I've always been a collector, half collector and half investor. So maybe I am a good person for this subject, because I actually pay close attention to cards that are interesting to me, but also that I think will have long-term value over time. So whether that be and I do not discriminate between modern and vintage. I understand both pieces of it. And I like both vintage and modern cards very much. So hopefully I could add some value to that discussion.
I don't know if you guys have both noticed, but I had something happen to me the other day that I thought, okay, this is the beginning of the end. I was watching someone's YouTube video, and there's commercials, right? And one of the commercials that came up was a website company that they're talking about investing in sports cards. And it was a commercial for their website on how to invest in sports cards. If you're a sneakerhead, and how to go invest in sport. I was like, okay, now that there's commercials about this, not just videos on YouTube, but literally a commercial, I'm like, okay, wow.
Is that the company, Mike? I don't know if this is the same company, but I know there's a company out there, and they're buying up high-end cards, and then they're basically selling pieces of the card.
Yeah, that's a different company. No, it wasn't the same. That's called Collectible. We actually, here on Bench Clear, did a video. Ty interviewed their CEO last week or something, but different deal. But it's the same idea, right? And so let's just start with a very simple question to both of you. Andy, I'll let you answer first. Have you noticed the vintage card, and particularly we're talking about baseball, let's just stick it with baseball. Have you noticed prices going up markedly?
I don't know if I would necessarily say I have across the board, but on a few key cards that I've been watching, I would say definitely in a couple of cases I have. But I don't know for sure if I would say it has across the board.
Okay. Joe, how would you answer that question?
When it comes to so obviously we've seen an incredible spike in sports cards. We've seen an insane spike like I've never seen before in especially like football and basketball and soccer cards, like non-baseball cards. The nice thing about baseball cards is that they've gone up, but they haven't like spiked and then like dropped. Like what we saw with the basketball cards is that they went crazy high, and then some cards took a really nice hit. With baseball, it's been pretty steady. Modern cards, at least from what I've seen, have really taken a big jump, but nothing like insane like I've seen in football and some of the other sports. Vintage has been very underwhelming, I guess. Vintage baseball, I should say. Vintage basketball and football have gone up incredibly, but the interesting thing is that vintage baseball, not that it's gone down or anything, but it's just been a kind of a slow increase during this time. Like nothing, it's almost like the MLB vintage market forgot that there was this boom. The boom occurred for everything else besides for vintage MLB. So that's what I've observed.
Yeah, my take on it is being that's pretty much all I kind of hunt for and I'm looking for. The problem with the way I collect, and maybe most collectors are like this, once I buy a card, XYZ card, I don't go look at it later, right? I've bought it. So the cards I'm mainly looking at are cards that I want to add to my collection. So like I can't tell you if a card I bought 6 months ago has gone up in value, quite frankly. But the stuff that I'm now searching for is significantly higher priced than it was before, because you can only buy so much at any given time, right? So there's always this, man, I'm looking for these cards that I want, and I pick something else because that's what I can do. And then I look back and I go, God, I wish I would have bought the other card, 6 months ago. And I'm sure we've all had that type of FOMO, regret, whatever you want to call it. So I would say it's going up. When do you guys, if indeed we agree that it's at least a slow burn going up or something, there is something going on in the vintage card market that's different. When do you guys think that kind of got started in terms of timeline? Do you think it's similar to the modern boom that we've seen?
I mean, I think back to, I believe it was like 2015 or 16. I know like a lot of the key rookie cards from the 50s and 60s went up pretty dramatically during that point. As far as the recent boom, like I said, like I guess I don't necessarily look at, I guess, the vintage market as a whole probably as much as you guys do. Like I just look at like certain key cards, and I've noticed certain key cards, like Hank Aaron, Willie May, guys like that. I've noticed some of their stuff, especially the rookie cards, have gone up quite a bit. And I would assume that that's probably true for a lot of those key rookies, but you guys probably paid more attention to the entire market as a whole, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in perspective, I guess, the 54 Topps Hank Aaron, I remember walking into a local card store, and I think it was 3 years ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. And, you know, I remember walking into the store, and it was a PSA 4, beautifully centered PSA 4. You guys, I'm sure, have seen the Hank Aaron rookie that I have. And it's kind of a funny story because I remember I walked in, I saw the card, and I think you wanted like 600 for it. And I remember I offered like 500, and I ended up the person at the card store ended up having to call the actual owner, and they basically said no, they weren't interested in selling it, and they actually pulled it off the shelf. And then I came back a couple weeks later, and they had it for 800. So I ended up going back to the same exact store, and I ended up buying it for I think it was 800. It might have been actually less than that, like 750 or something like that. And at the time, I was like, I can't believe I just spent like $750, $800 on a card. Like it was a lot of money at the time. I was like, that's $750, $800. And now I look back at that, and I'm like, wow, I wish I would have bought more. Like, so even though like and if you look at that card now, a Hank Aaron, like a perfectly centered Hank Aaron in a 4, probably would go between $3,000 to $4,000, and that's only in like a 3-year period or 3 or 4 year period. And it's amazing. Like, and and one of the things that I've been kind of saying on my channel is I actually think that the Hank Aaron card, the rookie card, is actually pretty undervalued. Especially when you see like, LeBron James rookie cards going for $10,000, $1 million. Mike Trout, I mentioned his 09 Bowman Chrome Auto going for tens of thousands of dollars. And you look at a 54 Topps Hank Aaron, like a beautiful version of the card. I know it's only a 4, but has great eye appeal. Looks like a great card. Like the fact that it's only a $3,000 card, to me, is still kind of undervalued. But with all that being said, it has gone up a lot. I mean, like to go for like any type of investment, that if you would have put your money into stock or mutual funds 3 or 4 years ago and have that that investment go from $800 to $4,000, you'd be pretty damn happy. So it's weird. It's like vintage cards, they've gone up a lot, but I still feel like especially on for MLB, at least that's my opinion, that there's many cards that are still undervalued.
You agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, I would say for sure. And that's the one that he's talking about. The Hank Aaron's definitely one of them.
I think we've talked about the Hank Aaron rookie on every episode at some point with it. You and I have been on, just because it's one of those, we think that's a card that is undervalued, and certainly one of those key cards that everybody kind of should have in their collection. There's a bunch of them. That's just one of them.
Yeah.
So thinking about, okay, Joe, you're talking about, so the last few years, I've seen it more in the last probably 2 years that I've really seen prices start to get, I wouldn't call it out of control, but certainly on the rise. But I don't think, and this is the next question I want to throw out to you guys, I don't think it's commensurate with the rise that we've seen in modern. Do you guys think it's anything similar, or it's completely different?
I mean, no, I don't think it's the same. And kind of like what Joe pointed out earlier, it's been more of a slow rise. It's been more slow and steady. Like it hasn't just been like, 10x overnight, like a lot of the stuff in basketball and football and even modern baseball has done. So I think it's been more of a natural growth. And I'm not sure how many of the new people that have came into the hobby that have, been a part of the big rise in a lot of those modern prices are participating in the vintage market. So that would be something interesting to know. I mean, I don't know if there's any way to really say for sure if they are or they're not, but you would go to think that if they are participating in the vintage market heavily, then it would have done kind of the same thing in baseball.
Yeah,
I have a theory on that. Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that, like, I think the nice thing about, especially vintage baseball, since that's sort of what we're focusing on right now, like vintage baseball, I think the beauty of it is that it's much more established, than a lot of these other markets. Like, like the beauty of MLB baseball vintage cards is you don't have to worry about as much of these sharp increases and sharp decreases. It's just a nice steady kind of, like, the market has been established for so long, and there's so many people that are true collectors that you're not going to see the I don't know, sometimes it scares me personally. Like, I don't like that I have so many cards in modern baseball cards, because it scares me sometimes, because I don't know what is going to happen day to day, like, on top of the fact that, at any point a player can, tear an ACL and that'll end their career. Forget about that fact for a second. But, like, Acuna and Tatis, and their cards are going all over the place. Like, a guy will have a great season like Acuna, and his cards are down. But the nice thing with vintage baseball is that they're nice and steady. Like I looked at the cards that I have, the vintage cards that I have since June, and they're up about 10% since June, which is nice. It's a nice increase, but it's not like, the beauty of it is that you don't, maybe it's not going to see the same kinds of increases that you may see in other markets. Maybe the opportunities aren't as tantalizing, but the beauty is that you don't have to worry as much about the card going from a $10,000 card to a $3,000 card the next day. So something I wanted to point out.
Yeah, and that's definitely part of the theory that I was going to throw out there. Is the vintage market much more, let's use the word stable, right? And then I think it's because the vintage players can't do anything to hurt their card values anymore. They can't break their leg or tear an ACL or throw out their arm and get Tommy John surgery or any of that. And so their story has been told, whereas on modern, these guys' stories are unfolding, good and bad, right? You see both sides of that. And so you see these giant spikes. I just don't understand for the life of me, and this is kind of an aside, comment if you'd like, how a modern player's rookie cards or any cards, autos, whatever, can be worth as much as a Mickey Mantle or a Hank Aaron or a Willie Mays or whoever, Steve Carlton or any Hall. I'm just going, wait a second. These guys are two totally, like, you got well-established, and they only had like one card. They had a Topps card. So it's not like you're having to figure out which brand to buy or which rookie to have or which one's more important than the other. You got one card to choose from. And, I just don't, it boggles my mind that people pay what they pay for these modern cards, especially the higher end, the bigger cards, compared to modern or compared to vintage.
Do you have a valuable card collection, but you put zero effort into storage? Do you keep your cards in a box like this?
Or like this?
Something like this? This? Ho, ho, ho. What are we doing here? You need Pastime Marketplace. Pastime Marketplace is the Mercedes-Benz of sports card storage. The cases come in a variety of sizes. They're waterproof, airtight, dustproof, and extremely durable. If you care about your collection, visit PastimeMarketplace.com and treat your cards to the storage they deserve.
Don't forget to use discount code BenchClear to get 10% off your order.
To me,
the baseball card values have never made any sense. It's impossible to figure it out. I've actually thought about doing some sort of video where I kind of, grab somebody that doesn't know sports cards that well, but maybe knows baseball pretty well, and just kind of put like two cards side by side, maybe put like a Ronald Acuna Sapphire next to a Mickey Mantle, and ask him, well, which card do you think is worth more? And of course he's going to be like, obviously the Mickey Mantle. And I'll be like, no, it's the Acuna. Just to kind of do that like throughout, the whole video of just comparing two cards next to each other because it doesn't make any sense. Like it's impossible to figure out. I think people get like certain cards get overhyped just randomly. So to try to figure it out, to try to rationalize it is almost impossible. So
yeah, and I think, and we kind of talked about this, but I just think the vintage market it's a more mature market as far as it's been established for a while, and I think some of these new modern markets and even the vintage football and basketball are relatively new. As far, I mean, it's weird to say vintage football and basketball would be new, but like up until just like the last couple of years, nobody really cared that much about it. Not the way people did about vintage baseball. So people are just now trying to establish the values for some of those cards. They seem like they were undervalued for a long time, so they shoot way up, and then they're like, well, now they're overvalued, so they go back down. And I think the prices for the vintage baseball have kind of, they've kind of leveled off over time, right, where there's kind of a norm to it.
Well, one of the cards that I've had my eye on lately is the Jim Brown rookie card. Because you guys know I've been trying to grab some of the GOATs of all time in each sport, and what scares me is, if I buy it at the price that it's at right now, is it like I'm actually worried about buying a vintage card because it might drop, because I know it's gone up a lot. And what worries me right now, especially with cards outside of Major League Baseball, if I buy a card like a vintage card, has it gone up too much, and now I'm buying it at the peak, and then it's going to start dropping, and I'm like, wow, like I could have saved myself a couple of $1,000s by just waiting a couple weeks or a couple of months. So I guess the nice thing about, at least with vintage baseball, is I feel like there's so many established collectors in the market that you're not going to see these spikes up or down, and it's a little bit safer, So
there's a common saying, I guess, at least that I hear sometimes, and I think about this all the time when I'm making a decision whether or not to buy a card today, about the same process that you're going through right now, Joe, with the Jim Brown.
Yeah.
Today's seemingly high price is tomorrow's discount, because the slow burn of that is you're going to look a year back and you're going, dang it. Shoot, even the Aaron you bought, you went back, a few weeks later, a couple months later, and you had to pay $200 more than if you would have just paid, you wouldn't have, quote unquote, been so cheap and just paid the $600, you would have had the card.
I know.
And you've been like, all right. And you would have still felt at the time that I can't believe I just paid $600 for a Hank Aaron rookie.
Right.
Now we look back and go, God, that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of true across the board, but in terms of vintage, but I also think, and this is the next topic I want to cover, is it just in the high end, or is it, and when I say high end, I'm talking about kind of investment grade, higher graded, either key rookie cards or key cards of vintage players, Hall of Fame players, etc. Or is it happening no matter what, are all Hank Aaron rookies, for example, going up, or is it just the high graded ones? Or is it only Hank Aaron rookies are going up, but his 4th and 5th and 8th year cards aren't really doing that much? What's your all's opinion on that?
I would say, from what I've noticed, like the rookie cards of some of those key Hall of Fame players, to me, it looks like they've been going up in pretty much all grades, because, if you're a person that wants to buy like a 5 or a 6, once they've eclipsed a certain point, you're like, I have to start looking at 4s, 3s and 4s. And then as more and more people do that, the prices of those go up, and it just kind of, trickles down. That's a good question on the, like the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th year, 10th year. I'm not sure about that kind of stuff. I haven't paid close attention to a lot of those cards, so I'll pass that along to Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying to Mike earlier that, so some of the big name guys have actually done really well, at least from what I've seen. Like, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron. You know the list.
Clemente, like no matter what card you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. It doesn't really matter what card it could be. It doesn't have to be the rookie card. That's for sure. I know I was actually looking earlier at, I just sorted the cards that I own. The card that went up the most for me, percentage-wise, was the 59 Topps Mickey Mantle that I have.
And that's an 8, right?
Yeah, I have it at an 8, but it's not a rookie card. It's a 59 Topps. I mean, it's a really high-end card. But, I do think that you need to be careful with buying, cards of guys that, I don't know, especially like the lower end kind of like semi-stars. I don't know. I don't know if those cards will, like, after a while, do people kind of forget about some of these? Like, no one's ever going to forget about Mickey Mantle and Hank Aaron and Clemente and all those guys we just talked about. But some of these lower end semi-stars that, as people get older, and I don't know, I'd be worried about the value of some of those lower end cards long term, as as people get older and and die off from COVID. That's kind of morbid.
Wow, that was a little too soon, I think. But do you?
But you know what I mean, right? Like,
you're saying like a 10th year Raleigh Fingers, and no one's gonna really. Is that really gonna have any appreciate? First of all, nobody appreciates it now. They're not going to appreciate it any more than they do today in the future, right?
It's like my dad collects 1952 Topps cards, and he'll buy like just like mid-grade common 52 Topps guys that he remembers as a kid, and I'm like I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know if he's not concerned about the value of it, but I just don't know if that has any long-term value, because like if it's a really, really high grade, like a PSA 8 or PSA 9, okay, but if we're talking about like even a mid-grade, like common from that set, I don't know. But then like maybe, if it is like an iconic set, maybe it doesn't matter. Like a 52 Topps T206 set, there's always going to be collectors of that set. So, but some of the, other cards after 52 Topps, I would be, I don't know if they'll continue to rise in value over time. At least that's not what I've seen, is that they've kind of been pretty stagnant.
Speaking of your dad, can I bring something up real quick? One of our new sponsors on this show is Pastime Marketplace. And Joe, during Hobby Palooza, you won a Pastime Marketplace graded card case, and I sent that to you, and you were excited, and I think you had plans for it. And tell everybody what you did with that case, because I think it's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, I love that case. I already started putting my own cards in it, but then my dad's birthday came up, and I was like, oh my God, this would be the perfect gift for him. So I immediately had to start taking my cards out of that case. And, I gave it to him for his birthday. He loved it. He like I said, he collects 52 Topps, and he, went through the process then of, I go, Dad, only the best of the best 52 Topps cards are going to go in this case. And he's like, yep, I understand. So he went, he spent, some time just, going through his best cards and, putting his best cards in that case. And he loves it. He loves the case that I gave to him. So obviously not only are those cases great for your own collection, but they could also make great gifts too.
Well, great segue, because, right now, if you want to go to pastimemarketplace.com, you can use the code BenchCleared, and you can get 10% off your first order. They are great. They are great. And so for all your vintage cards that you might have, slabbed or otherwise, put them in something really cool. Go check out Pastime Marketplace. So thanks to them for sponsoring the show. Oh, you don't need to see my email. There's my email. So it's one thing for us to be talking about this, and we are all presenting what our opinions are, our observations of the vintage card market in terms of price appreciation. But I think it's important to say, is it really happening? Like, we can think it's happening, but is it really happening? It's one thing to have a theory. And so what I did was, I have to give huge props to Ty on Bench Clear. We have a lot of resources here, and Ty is great. One of the reasons I love the Bench Clear team is we all kind of do different things and have different expertises. Is that a word? Expertises?
I don't know, but I need a Ty in my life.
You do? We all do. And I'm lucky enough to have one. And I said, hey, Ty, I'm going to give you these 10 key cards, or 10 cards I just want you to look at. And I looked at 51 Bowman, Mantle, Mays, 54 Aaron, 55 Koufax, for example, the 68 Bench, even a 75 George Brett rookie, and 80 Topps Ricky Henderson rookie, just to kind of span the world of vintage. And I said, hey, give me some data, whatever you can pull, to tell me, is it going up or not? Are these prices going up? And so I'm going to, if you're on YouTube, you'll be able to see this, and I'm sharing my screen. And I want you guys to see what has happened over the last 3 months. Unfortunately, eBay data that's really good data only goes back about 3 months, unless you've been storing it, so to speak. And since the first time I've asked Ty to do this,
let's see that data.
Yeah, we're gonna show some data. So here is a 68 Topps Johnny Bench, and a great card, right? Everybody should have a 68 Topps Johnny Bench, even though he's sharing it with Ron Tompkins. But that card, and what I did was I said, Ty, hey, give me what an 8's been doing and what a 5 has been doing. Because you got the high end of that card and then kind of the middle ground of that card. So when we look at this chart, you can see back in July, the card has gone up dramatically and stayed there. Kind of had a little bit of fluctuation, but not a ton, versus a 5 that's really stayed the same. Does anything about this surprise either one of you looking at this chart?
Not at all. No.
I can't really say that it is that surprising, and the reason I would say that is because I think that the 8 right now is still relatively affordable enough to where I don't think there's going to be much movement in a 5 yet and maybe if the 8 got higher, then you'd see some more movement in the lower.
Well, I think what you said, Andy, what you said earlier, I think is spot on. You get the higher, people get priced out of the higher grades. Everybody would love to own the highest. Like, who are we kidding? We'd all love to own 10s. Well, we can't. So we go, where's our price point? What can we afford? As those get bought up at those price points, that drives the prices higher. You have to drop your grade expectations of what you can afford. I think that's an absolute trickle-down effect. You mentioned it, Andy, and I think it's exactly what's happening, and I think will continue to happen. But Joe, your thoughts?
I just want to say nice job to Andy.
Yeah, good theory. No, it just makes total sense, right?
No, I mean, whoever bought that card on July 29th, he's the man. Look at that.
Right.
Yeah.
That guy's perfect timing. And that's what it's all about is, buying a card at the right time. Because you certainly don't want to be being the guy that spent $900 on September 27th.
Yeah. So for those of you that can't see it, if you're listening to this on a podcast, late July, the card was selling between $200 and $300. It's now selling currently around $700. So that's pretty good in a few months, right? Whereas the PSA 5 is around $150, and it's still around $150. It hasn't really moved. Let's look at the next card here. So here's a 75 Topps George Brett.
Woo!
Iconic card, no question. Even the guy that doesn't like us to use the word iconic card would say this is an iconic card because it's his favorite player. But
This makes me want to buy a George Brett and a PSA 8.
Okay, does it? So this, if you're not seeing this, it is literally like a a yo-yo that the PSA 8 has been on, from $350 all the way up to $650 right now. Currently, it looks like it's selling in the 250 to 300 range.
Wow.
Versus, again, the 5 has been quite boring from a chart. It's almost a flat line. Andy, any thoughts on that?
Sorry. So I just want to so one of the things that this graph is obviously not that is missing, that I mentioned to Mike earlier, is that there are many different types of PSA 8s, as you guys know. There could be a PSA like that. The one that sold for almost $650, I'm guessing, without even looking at that card, that it is a perfectly centered card that looks much better than a PSA 8. And my guess is that the one that sold for $250 just recently probably looks horrible for a PSA 8. So while this data is, it's interesting, the one thing that I have a problem with, and this comes with any vintage card, is, as you guys know, one of the things that I preach on my channel is buying the card and not the grade. And to be very careful, I just want to remind viewers that just because it's a PSA 8, take aesthetics into account. I would rather overspend for a PSA 8 that's perfectly centered, a beautiful looking card, than paying half the price for a card that I just don't like to have in my collection. That's way off center. That doesn't look like it's deserving of that grade. So I just want to be very careful for, because some of these graphs can be very deceiving because of the fact that not every PSA 8 is the same.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This one, I mean, just looking at the chart without seeing, like Joe said, any of the, specific traits of each individual card that sold. I mean, it kind of looks like a mountain range. This one is like, I mean, it's all over the map. So yeah, that's a little bit surprising to me. Like, I thought there would be, a little bit more consistency on this particular card. But once again, like the PSA 5 is not really that surprising because this is still a relatively affordable card if you're looking, at vintage rookies.
Sure. So I have a question to you guys. Like, will you guys pay a premium for a perfectly centered, much better looking card, in a PSA 8? Or do you kind of like, and what premium will you pay? Like, what percentage premium are you willing to pay over, like if let's say there's two cards on eBay, both are PSA 8s, but one is, perfect and one of them is, what percentage premium are you paying? Or do you look at each PSA 8 as kind of equal?
Go ahead.
I definitely take that into consideration. Because, and it's kind of like what you said, Joe, like, I don't want to have a card in my collection that every time I look at it, I'm like, gosh, I wish this thing was centered a little bit better. Because, stuff like that, it really bothers me. Like, when I look at stuff like that, a card that's like really bad, off-centered, like, I don't care what the number on it says, like, because that's the first thing I look at. And yeah, I'll definitely pay a premium. Like, I would much rather have like a very nicely centered like 2 or 3 than I would like an off-centered 6 even. So yeah, it's big for me.
Yep.
But you guys have to admit there's probably some collectors out there that are saying, man, we'd all love to have the high grade, perfectly centered, beautiful cards. But some guys are going, man, I really want an 8, but I can't afford to pay that perfectly centered premium, whatever that is, 20%, 30%.
Well, that's where I would disagree. I'd say buy the PSA 5, because I guarantee you can find a PSA 5 that's perfectly centered, that looks better than the PSA 8. I've seen that many times where I see a PSA 5 or a 6 that looks better than a PSA 8.
And then I would tell you that, yes, that makes sense. But if you're talking about, especially with PSA, right, you got set registry people that want that 8, that they want that number. And we all agree, there's no question in this room as we're talking, buy the card, not the grade.
Yeah.
We all agree with that. But there are people out there that buy the grade regardless of the card. They're buying the number. And so that person might be looking at it at a off-centered 8. It's still an 8, and they're just going to buy it, or it's an affordability issue. You know, there's probably some combination of all of those things. But let's look at the next card real quick. 80 Topps Ricky Henderson. Now that I'm seeing this data, and I think Joe and I talked about this earlier, I wish I would have used maybe a 9 or a 10 to look at a Henderson, because 8s in Henderson are not hard to come by. You know, they're not rare. So this chart, which looks like a relatively steady, it's not like a flat line, but it's certainly not moving. It's within a relatively tight range on what an 8 goes for. And the 5 is literally within $5 or $10. So,
by the way, speaking of cards that are undervalued,
the Ricky Henderson rookie.
Absolutely.
What's your grade on your Henderson rookie, Joe?
I think I have a PSA 8. I wish I should get something better. I mean, Ricky's the greatest leadoff hitter of all time. So
as soon as we get done with this podcast, Joe's going to go to eBay and buy a PSA 9 Ricky Henderson rookie.
The problem is I have 2 of his rookies, but so it's like it's hard to justify buying a third.
And you guys know the difference between on this kind of stuff, a 9 and a 10 is literally like 20x or I mean, it's so much different. A 9 is X dollars and a 10 is
a 9 is probably, I mean, last time I checked, a 9 was probably around 1,000, and a 10 is probably, you know, the price of a car.
Yep.
Right.
Sure.
So the Henderson's maybe not. It's interesting, but again, I wish I would have done it different. We're looking at a 51 Bowman Mantle now.
This graph is just sad.
It's only sad because there haven't been very many sales. There's only a couple of dots on the.
Although I wouldn't mind having a PSA 5 worth $18,000.
Well, that's one of those cards, though, that I think they're very reluctant to sell, even in a hot market, because that's one of those cards that a lot of people are going to want. People coming in are going to want that card. Yeah.
And when you get down into the older vintage and the kind of mid to low grades, then that spectrum of quality of each grade goes up that Joe was talking about earlier, in terms of not, especially like a 5 on the Bowman Mantle. They're all over the place in terms of just pure eye appeal, aesthetics, you know, very, very crazy spectrum of the way those cards can look.
Do you guys both have that card?
I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's your grade, Joe?
I have it in a SGC 3.
Okay.
But it's, again, I will say that I think it looks better than the grade. It's perfectly centered. I should have it right now, but I don't. So I can show you. But I try to go for, especially with vintage cards, I always try to go for the card and not the grade. It's funny because when it comes to modern cards, I go for the grade and not the card.
Right. Because they're all 10s.
Yeah, because I'm not buying a 9 of something. You have a modern card, I'm getting a 10. But when it comes to vintage, I'm actually I care more about the card and not the grade.
Let's look at a 51 Bowman Maze in a 5. And you can see that card has certainly in the last month gone from around the $4,500 to $5,000 range, and now it's pushing $7,000. So it's almost doubled, up like 80% in the last month. I think that's directly because Andy and I talked about Maze and with Eric those back pages a few episodes ago about how important it is to buy his cards. I think about that time that spike happened. Don't you think, Andy? That seems about right time-wise.
Well, I mean, it's possible. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if that is the case, I think we would probably both agree that Eric would probably get most of the credit for that.
No doubt. But I think the 51 Bowman Willie Mays is undervalued as well.
Now, this is a chart that makes total sense to me because, you know, recently we've lost a couple of the living legends in baseball. And I think that, you know, people are, you know, they're starting to think about some of these guys that are a little bit older. Their health maybe isn't that great. And, you know, they're wanting to pick something up of them while they're still with us. So this one makes total sense to me. This chart does.
Any thought, Joe? Do you have a 51 Bowman Mays?
Yes. And a perfect example. I have this one in a 3, but I don't like it. I don't like it. It's not like I think it's a 3 or a 4, but it's not the nicest looking card. So it's a perfect example of you know, sometimes you regret some of your purchases because you don't like the way it looks. So. But I agree. It's undervalued.
Now we're looking at a 54 Topps Hank Aaron, the card we have been talking about a lot, or using as an example. PSA 8s obviously are becoming, and it might be harder to find them, I guess, right? People are kind of buying them and putting them kind of in the vault. Go ahead, Joe.
What's going on with this graph? I mean, so there was a PSA 8 that sold for less than a PSA 5. That's interesting.
Look, I just showing the data. I didn't gather the data. So
that's an odd outlier for sure.
Yeah.
Let's probably assume that something's goofy there. Or all right. We'll just move on to the next card. How about that? Here's a Koufax rookie. Kind of similar vein to the Mays in terms of still with us, living legend. So you've seen his higher end rookie cards go up in value, right? Yep. Not surprising. I wanted to look also at like a kind of mid-career card of Mantle, because we all know that kind of Mantle is the king of the vintage card market. There's no denying it, even though he was a Yankee. That was a jab at Joe, by the way, like directly across the bow. So here's a 56 Topps Mantle, which is, I think, one of the coolest cards ever made is the 56 Topps Mantle. It's in my top 10 of favorite cards ever. And the PSA 8's kind of stayed pretty steady, and so is the 5. You haven't really seen a spike in that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. You haven't seen a noticeable movement upwards in that type of a card.
The one thing I keep seeing with these graphs, though, is what I was saying before, unfortunately, you know, is that I'm seeing the lower end stuff kind of like this, you know, just kind of like a line that kind of doesn't really go up, doesn't really go down. And then the higher end stuff, you know, just keeps going up. And maybe it's not a significant amount, although that Hank Aaron we saw in the previous slide went way up. It's unfortunate, I guess, sometimes, because it's like some of the upper echelon cards just keep going up and up and up. And it's just, and the cards that are kind of just in the middle are just kind of, you know, like it's just sort of what we're seeing. Like we're seeing the same stuff we've seen for the last 40 years, you know, where, can you imagine, like, if you look at a Beckett from 50, you know, and you look at the 52 Mantle, and, you know, it's just gone from like, you know, a $10,000 card to like a $1 million card. And while at the same time, you know, the rest of the cards in the set are are almost like if you especially look at the commons, they're the same price in the Beckett that I looked at in 1992 as they are today. Like there's not much that has changed in terms of value. It's just crazy. Like how some of these just upper tier cards just keep going up. It's crazy. Yeah, here we go.
Bob Gibson. I wanted this card to be included because of his he passed away recently. I was trying to get a little bit of the kind of death spike, which sounds really maybe not the right way to say that, but it's happened. But I think that was already happening. I mean, he passed away, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago? Maybe not even that long.
Yeah, I don't even think it was that long ago.
But by the time this episode airs, it'll be a couple of weeks. So I don't have great current data, but the 8 has gone from a $400 card to a $1,800 card in the last 3 months. And the 5, you see that last little spike there at the end is, it's a $600 card. And Joe, I know you have it in a 6, the Gibson rookie, and it's selling for around 1,000 now.
Yeah, I just saw it. What you always see that little spike. Well, it'll probably go back down a little bit. There's always like that after somebody passes away where it goes up, substantially, but then it kind of comes back down. But it'll never go back down to where it was. It'll always,
So what'd you pay for that card? The Gibson? You bought it recently.
Yeah, I think I paid $600.
Okay.
And so now it's going for 1,000, but I assume that was kind of a one-off, and it'll kind of come back down again.
So, kind of getting towards the end of our time here, and I want to. Is any of that like conclusive? Are we able to draw any conclusions from what we just saw in those graphs? And for those of you listening on the podcast, there was some meaningful increases. I wish I had better data in terms of going back a year or 18 months ago. That would be, I think, pretty
nice if Ty provided better data.
Well, I'm not going to blame. I gave Ty like a day's notice. Here's what I want you to do. Can you do this? And he goes, yeah, I can pull it off. And he did. So I'm just grateful that he did it at all.
It's pretty solid.
But if you think, as we finish up, kind of last thoughts I'd love to hear from each of you is the near term and kind of long term future of what you think vintage card prices are going to do. Where do you think we're heading?
Okay, so first off, going back to the graphs for just a second, like to me, just looking at the data from the last 3 months and the big discrepancy between like the 8s and the 5s, to me that looks like the 8s are probably going more. They're more to people that are coming in to invest, and the 5s are probably more collectors. So I think that's why there's such a dramatic increase with the 8s as opposed to the 5s. I would expect the vintage baseball market to kind of continue what it has done for many, many years and be just more of a slow and steady burn, because I think more than any other place in sports cards, it has more norms established already.
So what do you think the future holds? Just continue same?
I think it's going
to
be kind of slow and steady like it has been.
Okay. Joseph?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to sound like a broken record, but yeah, I think that these vintage cards, if it's a high grade, in a superstar player, those cards are going to continue to go up incredibly, as we've seen, and I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. I think that the beauty in vintage cards is that they are the market is, you don't have to worry about them, climbing incredibly or declining. It's the nice thing is it's almost like you're investing in like a treasury bond. It's just, every year it goes up 5%. It's not very exciting. It just kind of goes up a little bit over time. And that's I don't know, like it depends on the type of, collector investor you are, if that's something that you're interested in. I know for me, like I look at my baseball cards as like a portfolio, like that you would, I have a little bit of like high risk, modern stuff that I like to have, but I also like to have the core, vintage blue chip type stuff that may not go up incredibly, but I know every year it'll go up, 5 to 10%. Those Mickey, like you can't go wrong with a Mickey Mantle or a Willie Mays or a Hank Aaron or whatever legendary Hall of Famer you want to go with in vintage. I'm pretty safe in buying and feeling. And the cool thing is that with vintage baseballs, especially, you don't have to worry about it. Like, especially even with like vintage football and some of the other sports, the market is still kind of figuring itself out. So you could end up like paying way more than you need to on a card, and it goes way down. Whereas with baseball, you don't have to worry about that as much. It's like you're gonna spend your money on that particular card. You don't have to worry about it. You spend $1,000 and then a couple weeks later it's worth a couple $100. It'll go up a little bit. It'll go up a little bit more. I do think one thing I haven't mentioned is that I do think that there's a lot of new collectors in the hobby. And when you have new collectors in the hobby, I don't know about you guys, but when you get back into the hobby, you don't buy a vintage, Hank Aaron rookie, right? So the first thing you do is maybe you buy a box at Target, like blaster box. And then you go, you know what? Like I opened up a box and I didn't hit the Luis Robert rookie. So you go and maybe you go on eBay and you buy a Luis Robert. I think as some of these new collectors that have come into the hobby, as they get a little bit more familiar and they get a little more comfortable with I think they're going to start wanting some more of the vintage stuff. So I actually am pretty bullish on on vintage cards in baseball, because I think as some of these new guys that are, flipping, and as they become less about flipping and more about collecting, I think that they will start to venture towards vintage. So
Yeah, I think that's
I saw
absolutely.
Andy leave for a second.
Yeah, I think that's totally possible, Joe, because as I think we can all say that when we started. Like, I didn't collect vintage. I couldn't either afford it, or B, know anything about it and feel confident in doing it. As these collectors season and age in their hobby, they're going to go, you know what? I want a few of the finer things, right? And that might look like them buying vintage cards more, which could drive up prices. I don't think, again, you're going to see spikes like you see in the modern market. So to me, the long-term future of vintage prices is great. I just think you're going to be, you're never going to be unhappy that you bought vintage. I don't think, if you're buying kind of anything really. But it's been a focus of mine for years now. And it's not that you can't enjoy the hobby a whole lot of different ways. But Joe, you mentioned it earlier, you have a little bit of everything, and you like kind of the vintage stuff's just cool too, right? It's cool to say you own a card that's 70 years old or 100+ years old, or there's some cool factor to that is hard to quantify, but it's definitely there. And Joe, you said you didn't want to sound like a broken record earlier, but man, I heard you singing earlier, and any record that you made would get broken. Let me tell you.
What's that? You want me to break out the guitar again?
I do not want you to break out the guitar again. In fact, if you smashed the guitar, that would not, in honor of Eddie Van Halen passing away, you could, oh my gosh. Andy, as Joe serenades us off into the sunset tonight, final thoughts.
Andy,
man.
That's about baseball cards.
Hey, Joe, where can people find you, man, on all the social media world that's out there?
I've tried Instagram and others. I'm on YouTube.
And what's your channel name?
Silver Jackify.
Silver Jackify.
Yeah,
it's spelled just like you would think it's spelled.
Right, Silver Jackify. Even though my name's Joe, I'm not. People call me Jack sometimes, but it's Joe.
Well, Joe, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate it. Is this your podcast debut?
I think so. Yeah, it's my. I think I was on Mike O's podcast once, so I guess not.
Well, I always like being second.
First loser.
Second's better than third, right?
But Joe, seriously, thanks for your I mean, I appreciate what you bring to the hobby, your knowledge and your experience, and it's been good. It's been fun to talk about. And Andy, as always, my friend, appreciate you, man.
Good time, fellas. Good time.
All right, guys, that's it. We will be back next week with another episode of the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. Till then, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care. And keep collecting.
Woo!